Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you for joining. If you can and are willing to put your video on, feel free. And you can. If you're in a quiet place, you can also unmute yourself. It's not a problem. I will share my screen now so you can see the PowerPoint. 1 second. Okay, can you see that? Yes, no?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, so today's topic is the second part of this kind of series. It's about battling lust. And the reason why we picked that topic was because, we filled out that Google form. So in that Google form, it was interesting what came out. Obviously, we don't know who wrote what, and that's the whole point of it. But just as a general consensus, this is what happened. So lust was the top of the struggles amongst all of our struggles. Then something to do with chanting and reading, then stuff around discipline, then stuff around friendships and offenses, and then about self-appreciation and balance. So I was thinking I'll just take the topics as they come, pretty much. Lust was the top one. So we're going with this session is about lust. And so we'll just start. We'll start with some prayers. Anyone wants to join in, feel free. Om Jnanatirandasya Jnananjana Chakshuro Tasmai Shri Gurave Shri Chaitanya Manodishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamaya Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapad Kamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sahagana Ladita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Dina Jagan Gopesha Gopida Kanta Radha Kanta Tapta Kanchana Gopi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Vancha Kalpita Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Gaura Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Rama. Okay, great. So in order to make the Sangha, I guess, helpful, please do ask questions. You can just send them to me if it's like a private question. I've got quite a lot of slides to get through, but I feel like the information will be useful. I basically just heard different classes and added some realizations and different research from the internet. And the point is that lust is a struggle that we all struggle with, whether it's one way or another. So in terms of even talking about lust and what lust is, like from a very gross perspective, there's probably three broad categories of lust. One would be about lust, like, so kind of falling down to lust in three areas. One, in marriage, so that's where sexual proclivity is not used for children. Then one would be like in relationships, which would be kind of like a similar illicit activity. And then one would be before one's in relationships, kind of by themselves. So I mean, some of us may have this problem, some of us may not, but whoever, even if you don't have the gross problem, lust is still generally in the heart, even from sight, even from looking at things. So it's quite a powerful thing. And for those of you that have managed to kind of come past the gross problems, it's great to give strength and courage to others. And for those that are battling through the gross problems, it's good to understand that these things are very common, and a lot of people will go through it. A lot of us go through it. So it's nothing to kind of get too worried about. But if we can use this kind of a Sangha to, one, share questions and doubts, but also just get a really nice fundamental understanding of the whole subject, that will let us kind of hopefully give us the strength to be able to tackle it. So I will move on now. And in the same format as last week, we'll go through that book, Screwtape Letter. The Screwtape Letter is a book from a senior devil to a junior devil in the devil's assisting of making a lost conditioned soul stay in Maya, essentially. So in this one, they're talking about the pleasure that comes from lust. So he says, never forget that when we are dealing with any pleasure in its healthy and normal and satisfying form, we are in a sense on the enemy's ground. The enemy is God. I know we have won many a soul through pleasure. So he's saying that God made all pleasures. All our research, i.e. the devil's, all our research so far has not enabled us to produce even one pleasure. All we can do is encourage the humans to take the pleasures that God has given and at times or in ways use it in degrees that he has forbidden. So I found that really interesting. If anyone wants to kind of comment on it, please do. Like, anyone want to share any thoughts on that? My initial understanding was basically around, it's basically showing that Krishna has made all these different pleasures. So even even this pleasure that is expressed through lust, Krishna has made that. It is a sacred pleasure. But what the devil does, what Maya will try and trick us to do, is use that pleasure in a way that is not as Krishna had intended, and therefore become sinful and become degrading. So I found that really interesting and a really good point from Screwtape's letters. So I thought one thing is really good to understand is that, and Prabhupada talks about this, and this slide is mainly from an article from Chaitanya Charitamrita, is that sex desire, sexual pleasure, this indulgence, this lusty indulgence is actually, a lot of it is just glitter. A lot of it, Prabhupada uses the word often phantasmagoria, which is kind of like, it's on the surface, it's not so real. It's almost like virtual reality. Like, he gives an amazing, I was talking to someone the other day and we were thinking, like, it's kind of like you've got your mind, so your mind is here, and then you've got sense objects. So the sense objects may be an image, a video, whatever it may be. Or it can even be a concept, like this, in this sense, like the concept of fulfilling lusty desires. And the reality of this and this are very clear. Like, we know what the reality of our mind is in a certain way, and this. But actually what happens is that between our mind and the sense object, Maya or the devil or our past conditioning puts like an Instagram filter on it. So it makes what's past the filter look really amazing. So, you know, sometimes people on Instagram or whatever social media platform, they'll take a rubbish picture and then they'll put a wicked filter on it and it'll look amazing. Like, anyone can recognize that, relate to that. So in that same way, this is what Maya does to us. So she puts this amazing filter that everything beyond this filter, everything in the material realm is amazing and pleasurable. And so the Bhagavatam talks about how in the 7th canto that the pleasure obtained from this act is kind of like scratching an itch. And from this verse, we can take 3 lessons. One is that the pleasure that's obtained from here is very temporary. Like, despite how much media there is, how many movies show that people are enjoying for hours and hours and days, actually the truth is that the pleasure that comes from this is very, very brief. It's almost like heartbreakingly brief. Like, someone will endeavor so hard for this and then it'll be over in a matter of moments. And that's the point, that actually we should understand that the pleasure that comes from this is very, very temporary. Secondly, it's illusory. It's illusory because we engage in a certain activity for the sake of pleasure. So we think that, okay, by engaging in this activity, I will get happiness and pleasure. What actually happens is that you don't get long-term happiness or nourishment at all. Like, it's kind of like, if you look at the example of like a car and a driver, a car needs fuel to work and a driver needs food to work. If you give food to the car and fuel to the human, it's just not going to work. It's just going to be really strange. So in the same way that when we're looking for happiness, like proper happiness, and then we engage in these material activities, what happens is that it's illusory. So we don't actually get what we want, and it just looks that it's going to be pleasurable, but at the end of the day, it doesn't bring out any fulfillment. It just gives maybe and like the third point, it just gives, it's actually miserable, because what it does is just like what the Bhagavatam says, it's like an itch. You know, if you've ever had like a pimple or an itch and you scratch yourself, you feel relieved for like 10 seconds. And then what happens is the process of scratching actually makes the itch and the rash worse. So in the same way that when we scratch this particular itch, it doesn't gives us maybe like momentary relief, but then it just makes everything worse, and it makes everything deeper and stronger and harder to get over. So one thing, basically, I just wanted to start this kind of session with the concept of, with the fact that there's a whole glitter around this whole thing. There's a whole glitter around lusty pleasures, and actually they are very temporary. They're illusory in their promise of happiness. And at the end of the day, the scratching of the itch makes things worse. And yeah, just if you have any questions or thoughts, please feel free to unmute yourself at any time and ask or shout out. So I did a lot of research on the internet trying to look for studies on the power of celibacy. So not from a spiritual point of view, from a material point of view. And so one study I came across was this. So this was a particular man who did a kind of like self-assessment, and he's not religious at all. And for 6 months, he went celibate. Just 6 months, okay? For people outside of the devotee world, apparently that's a huge achievement. But anyways, so he went celibate for 6 months, and he found these things happen to him. He found his ability to create and record, so his creative thinking went up by 400%. He found increased mental processing power, speed and focus. He found increased self-esteem, increased empathetic abilities. He got obviously removal of fear, blah, blah, blah. He found that that drive, that sexual energy or that sexual drive actually was able to transfer into creative, powerful energy that was not used for selfish purposes, rather it was used for others and supporting others. And he also found that his senses were heightened and his mind was less distracted. So these are a random person's findings on the power of celibacy just for 6 months. And the reason why I'm saying this is because in the Vedic concept, that the power of celibacy is so strong. That's why you see like saints and brahmacharis and sannyasis who are so effulgent, who are so spiritually intelligent, because what it is, the science is that the vital fluids, in this context, a semen, is so powerful that any sort of wastage or discharge really reduces the vitality of the body. And like from an Ayurvedic perspective, it talks about how strong this substance is. And it's really hard to get an appreciation of this if you're not kind of familiar with the concept. But there's these points that I read in a really good Ayurvedic article, and I'll send the article around after so you can read it also. But so the concept is whenever you take food, your food is broken down into different things. And as it goes through the stages of breaking down, it refines into different materials. So there's 7 dhatus. Dhatus, I don't exactly know the translation, but it's kind of like, we can take substances as a kind of word for it. So from our food, what happens from the food is that the food is broken down, and then that's broken down, Ayurvedically, it's broken down into a form of blood. Then from blood comes flesh, from flesh comes fat, from fat comes marrow, and from marrow comes semen. And that is the final, so it's the most refined element of our food. So our food is being used up in the body for whatever reasons. And as it gets refined and refined and refined, just the highest portion is used for this vital fluid. And what this vital fluid, so this vital fluid is equivalent to what Ayurvedic says, 80 drops of blood. So imagine cutting yourself and losing lots of blood. It's kind of the equivalent of discharging this fluid. And so the Ayurvedic scriptures talk about how like a tree draws its essence from the water and the nourishment from the earth. In the same way, the body gets nourishment from this vital fluid. This vital fluid is present all over the body, and it gives strength and nourishment and power. It's so if you can imagine, it's so refined, it's so powerful, so strong that it actually uplifts the whole spirit and the body, and it makes it gives vitality to the whole body and all these different organs. Like in the scriptures, the Lord of Health, the incarnation of health from Vishnu is Dhanvantari. You probably heard of Dhanvantari. And in the scriptures, it talks about, there's one conversation where a student, after he's taught the whole Ayurvedic scriptures, asked Dhanvantari one question. He said, kindly let me know the best secret of health. And so Dhanvantari replies saying, this virya, or this vital fluid, is the secret of health lies in the preservation of this vital force. he says, he who wastes this energy cannot have physical, mental, moral, and spiritual development. So it's kind of, again, showing how strong this is. Like, if you haven't, for example, if you haven't read like the Brahmachari book or different books about this, you may find it a bit odd, but actually it makes sense, because imagine this fluid has the power to create children. Like, it must have real strength, it must have real depth in it. So in the same way, if when it stays in our body, what happens is, for yogis who don't have children, who don't have any of these activities, the fluid rises throughout the body and to the brain and really nourishes the brain to provide powerful spiritual, a powerful platform for spiritual development. And there's many more quotes, and like one of these is from a doctor, and this doctor is saying, and he's like a Western science doctor, and he's saying it's kind of almost universally accepted that this is the most powerful element in the body. And he says that any discharge of this element is literally like a waste of life. And therefore, he says, a chaste life is essential to a man's well-being. So the point of this opening bit was, one, to understand the falsity of the promise of lust, and then to understand actually being chaste, being not engaging in these activities is so beneficial for our life, from a material point of view and from a Ayurvedic and spiritual point of view. And so I guess the point here is that because so many of us have put that on the Google form, saying that this is something we're struggling with. So one is to get a basic understanding of the knowledge of why potentially we can see and understand that it's negative, and why we can see that by abstaining from it, what's positive about it. So these are the things. And now what we're going to go through is how to deal with lusty desires. Because, okay, it's nice to know that it's really good to not engage in lusty desires, but to be honest, you probably already knew that. Now what we're going to go through is, on a physical, mental, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual level, on these 5 levels, how to deal with these lusty desires and create a whole package of tools and understanding for us, that when a lusty desire then comes, we know how to handle it, and we know how to prevent those desires coming, and we know how to battle those. So that's kind of the point of this session. So again, this is another bit from Screwtape Letter. Very interesting. So what they're now talking about is how to find, so the devil is talking to the other devil and trying to say, your patient is at that kind of age and at that kind of time where he wants to engage in lusty passions. So how do I, and the guy's asking, how do I find someone who's attractive for him? And therefore he'll get kind of wooed into it. So he says, in a rough and ready way, of course, this question is decided for us by the spirits far deeper down in the hierarchy, i.e. the opposite of a hierarchy, than you and I. It is the business of great masters in every age to produce a general misdirection of what may be called sexual taste. This they do by working through small circles of popular artists, dressmakers, actresses, and advertisers who determine the fashionable type. The aim is to guide each sex away from members of the other who will actually help them have spiritually helpful, happy, and fertile marriages. So it's interesting that he's saying that the devil or Maya is kind of working through fashion industry, through the Hollywood, through all these things to give us an impression of what we should want. And that impression of what we should want is as far away as possible from what's actually good for us. So I thought it was really clever, and we can definitely tell that's the case. So, okay, now we're going to look at it on a physical level. This is like the attraction point. So from a physical level, the way to avoid lust, a way to avoid lusty desires, first is to avoid triggers. Like Chaitanya Champru gives a nice example. Someone who struggles with drinking, he can't just walk into a bar and expect to not drink. So for example, someone like us who may struggle with lusty desires can't expect to engage with lusty sense objects and not fall down. So the idea is to avoid those triggers as far as possible. And then another thing is that once we've been exposed to a trigger and we're kind of getting into that spirit, we suddenly develop a lot of energy and a lot of like a buildup of strong energy. And that energy can either be then used into that direction, or if we re-engage it, so something like, so say we may have, like that energy is dragging us down to the mode of ignorance, let's put ourselves into passion. Let's do some hard exercise. Let's do something, just get out of that kind of mental space. We can redirect our energy, and that will allow that kind of lower energy to be uplifted and engage in a higher mode, and that can relieve of that stress of being connected to that lusty desire. And the third thing is to avoid and reduce things that increase our kind of desire to engage with triggers. So if anyone, there's a book obviously called Brahmacharya and Krishna Consciousness, and it talks about 5 main triggers, and it may seem very strict, but actually it's very, very true. And if you think about it, if we're wanting to kind of avoid these desires, the most powerful way is to be able to have good barriers around us. So one of the things so 5 of the things it talks about a brahmachari or someone who's trying to practice celibacy should not think about women. He should not speak about sex life. He should not dally or act frivolously with women. He should not look at women lustfully, rather look at women like mothers. And he should not talk intimately with women. And a couple of other things that I've added, and it's also from the book. One is secrecy. Often, like if we're in a secret environment, like if we're in a locked room, or if we're in this kind of place, or if we're alone with someone else, it's much easier to fall into lower habits, rather than if everything's open, it's very difficult to do that. And the book also speaks about trying to avoid aubergines and chilies, if anyone would like that. If anyone likes aubergines too much, the book talks about the science behind different foods and how they affect the body and how they affect basically the quality of our vital fluid. So that is, so that last bit, Gopinath, is from that book, Brahmacharya and Krishna Consciousness. After the talk, I will send a link on the group so you can, there's a PDF of it so you can read through it. It's a very good book and I genuinely recommend it. Yes, Harsh, good point. Okay, so the second level we're going to talk about is the emotional level. The orange book, yeah. So in this one, again, he's talking about how to trap his subject into desires of sex. So he says, in the first place, I have always found that trough periods of the human undulation provide excellent opportunity for all sensual temptations, particularly those of sex. This may surprise you because, of course, there is more physical energy and therefore more potential appetite at the peak periods. But you must remember that the powers of resistance are then also the highest. The health and spirits which you want to use in producing lust can also be very easily used for work or play or thought or innocuous merriment. The attack has a much better chance of success when the man's whole inner world is cold, drab, and empty. So what he's talking about is that in the day, we may go through emotional highs and emotional lows. We may go through physical highs and physical lows. We may be tired, we may be bored, we may be frustrated, it might be a low, and we may be really confident and happy when it's a high. So he's saying that the devil tries to attack when we're at a low because our powers of resistance are lower. So I think that's a really important point, and it's going to take us to our emotional point. So in terms of emotion, so dealing with lust on an emotional level is essentially not engaging in lusty desires when we feel bored, lonely, or frustrated. See, like what happens in the material world often, and it may happen in our lives, it may have happened in our lives, is that when there's significant frustration, when there's a lot of loneliness, a lot of boredom, a lot of material people turn to a habit of sexual pleasures because they feel like they can't manage that emotion. They can't deal with it. So rather than wanting to deal with the frustration, they just engage in something like lust, and they feel like, oh, I'll get relief from this emotion, and then they'll go away. But all that happens is that you get temporary relief, and then that emotion comes back. They haven't managed to solve their boredom. They haven't managed to solve their loneliness. And this comes when it's like really at the tip, when we're really at a low, which is very natural because the mind just kind of goes like this. So there's no issue with the mind going up and down because the mind is material. The mind is got so many influences. So I wouldn't worry about that. But the point is how we deal with it when it gets to a low. Like, I'll give you an example. Like someone who trying to stop taking drugs. In the first week of them stop taking drugs, what happens is they have strong withdrawal symptoms, right? They have strong withdrawal symptoms and they can give headaches and they give so many things, but somehow or another, after 2 weeks, they manage to kind of overcome their withdrawal symptoms with great willpower and hope and determination. But then what happens is the next week or the next day, they get into a huge argument. Their whole family is angry at them. They want to leave the house and they get frustrated like anything. In their frustration, what do they turn to? They turn to that which they're used to. They turn to their drugs. And that's the point, is that when we have a habit of this, when we're struggling with this, is that when our emotions go to this level, we turn to whatever we think will give us that quick happiness, that quick pleasure. And what it is that what the solution is that we have to re-educate our emotions. We have to take responsibility of our emotions, develop the maturity that when boredom comes, when loneliness comes, when frustration comes, it's just an emotion. I don't need to act badly on it. I don't need to do anything in particular. I just need to watch it, understand what's going on, and take it in a mode of goodness in a positive way. Like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives this amazing quote. I love this quote so much. He says that using lust to solve your problems is like taking shelter of a kidnapper when you're being attacked by thieves. That makes sense. I'm going to say it again. Using lust to solve your problems is like taking shelter of a kidnapper to hide from thieves. So the thieves are loneliness, boredom, frustration. And then when we want to get away from it, we go to a kidnapper, which is lust. And it doesn't make any sense at all. It may seem very natural for the mind, but it doesn't actually make any sense. So the idea of this is that we have to re-educate our emotions to seek something higher in those times of low. And one thing we should know is that these things go like waves. So our mood will be down and then our mood will be up. And that's normal. And if you can ride that wave, then you'll be okay without having to do anything too significant. But if you're at the bottom, best is to look up and find those pleasures that will lift you back up, because then you can have less lows and you can have a more kind of upward trajectory. So the principle is, we have to re-educate our emotions. When these emotions come, we know what's going to happen. Our habits are going to go to back. We're going to go to what we seek comfort in. So let's start looking for comfort in higher things. Try it once, try it twice, fail once, fail twice, fail 5 times, fail 10 times. It will definitely happen. But so long as we keep trying, it will keep moving in the right direction. Someone is just asking for the quote. So I'm going to put that on the chat. And we have a really good question. The question is, how do you apply the brahmacharya standard if you are in a relationship? And how do you know if you're ready for a relationship? So I'll take the two questions separately. I think by the brahmacharya standard, he's talking about these 5 things and kind of celibacy. So just to be clear, celibacy means abstaining from sexual activities that are not for procreation. So that could mean, so that's clear. So in a marriage, for example, a couple that kind of engages in these acts for the purpose of procreation is still considered celibate, according to Prabhupada's definition. And in terms of thinking about women, speaking of sex life, dallying with women, look lustfully at women, talking to women. So obviously, like if you're married or if you're in a relationship, it'll be really hard not to think about women, because if you didn't think about your girlfriend or you didn't think about your wife, you wouldn't really have a relationship. So it doesn't really make sense. But I think the point is when you're kind of thinking of, like, there's one which is the reason for marriage is that it contains our kind of exposure to these things. Like, for example, even a married person shouldn't look lustfully at other women. Well, ideally shouldn't look lustfully at anyone, but definitely should look lustfully at other women. So the point of applying brahmacharya standards to a relationship, the principle is that we should focus on what is, we should focus on what is supporting our Krishna consciousness, what is developing our Krishna consciousness. Any tinge of lust, which there will be, we're all contaminated, we will have lust, we may fall down, we may struggle with this, we may struggle with that. But the idea is, the principle is to try and uplift ourselves, try and raise our consciousness, try and see other women as mothers. For a brahmachari, especially, because they don't want to enter that, especially like a student age, there's often no need to kind of enter into that space. And the principle is, practicing these principles will give us a lot of spiritual strength, so that when we come to the Grihastha ashram, we have that foundation of spiritual strength. Otherwise, what happens in the material world is that students kind of have no depth and no real understanding of male psychology, no spiritual strength, no spiritual understanding. They get married, and then they just treat marriage just like having a platform for their desires, whereas that's not the point. The point of marriage is it's a forum to develop spiritually and to serve the community. So having this kind of I lost my train of thought, but having this deep foundation at the student age, kind of like 15 to 20 or whatever age it is, or 12 to 20, whatever, having that deep foundation is so beneficial for the other years of life, whether one becomes a brahmachari or doesn't become a brahmachari. Another question was I hope that helps. And a lot of these questions will be answered in the final slide. So I'm just going to touch on them, but then I'll maybe come back to them. How do you know you're ready for a relationship? I think that's a really good question. And I think that what I found is that when kind of considering these kind of topics, there's a few aspects to it. One is, like, in terms of relationships, there's like a general age. So kind of there's a general age for one leaving the student ashram and moving into the grihastha ashram. In the Vedic times, it was considered like 25. And now it's maybe considered a bit earlier because we don't live to 100 years or whatever, but it's kind of, there's a general age. And the second thing is that we'll have I think it's important that we have a strong, so one point is not to cross that age too far, because those who may seek to get into relationships at too late of an age can have different problems later on in their life in their grihastha ashram. So it's important not to kind of try and cross that, but important to, when we're at the student age, to build a strong spiritual foundation, because that will give us the emotional strength, the spiritual strength to be able to be in a successful relationship. And knowing we're ready, I think for most people, they probably don't know they're ready, and most people just get attracted to someone and get into it, which is what seems to happen quite normal. And then they have to go through the process of readying themselves. And knowing we're ready is, to be honest, like, how do you know you're ready for an exam? How do you know you're ready for this or that? You've studied, you've figured it out, you've really taken time to think about what this means. Like, if I were to ask you what you have to study for your science A-level, everyone will probably know, because there is a contents page and there's a list and everything. So even for relationships, even for the grihastha ashram, it's really important that before we get to that stage, we should study what the grihastha ashram is. What are the duties of a grihastha? What do good grihasthas look like? What are the pitfalls in the ashram? And once we have a solid understanding, you'll actually be able to tell yourself whether you're ready or not, whether you feel confident to kind of take this next step. And I think that's what happens a lot, is that sometimes, like, we think that relationships and parenting, they'll just kind of happen naturally, but actually they're such big topics in our life. And I think it's really important to study. Like, I remember, like, for a good, like, quite a few months while I was kind of moving into that headspace, I was really confused, like, whether I want to be a brahmachari, whether I want to be a grihastha. And then my mentors made it really clear what I should be. And then once I kind of got a bit of that clarity, then I spent quite a bit of time listening to lots and lots of classes on the grihastha ashram, reading books, making notes, trying to get a sense of what it means, speaking to senior grihasthas and say, well, how do you deal with this? How do you deal with that? What does that mean? What is this? Like, what do you struggle with? What's good? And from that, I feel then I was ready. Like, I'm not saying I'm good or successful or whatever, any of that, but like, I had a bit of confidence that, okay, I'm kind of ready. And then I'm sure things will evolve, and it's kind of like a on the job, you learn, etc., etc. But so that's kind of my point with this. And I'm probably not giving the best answer, but the only thing I can speak on is from my experience, is that I think it's important when we're moving from phase to phase in life, is to really understand what the next phase looks like. Listen to talks, listen to classes by grihasthas, by sannyasis, there's so many classes on Krishna conscious marriages. Do some reading, there's so many books around it, and speak to people and get an understanding of what it means, and then you'll know whether you're ready or not. Okay, I'm gonna pause on the questions for a bit, lots of good questions, move on to the next one. But yeah, so we've talked about a physical level, we've talked about the emotional level, and now let's talk about the mental level. So the devil here is talking about how they make it work. He says that an ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure is the formula. So he's basically saying that what they try and do is that they try and inspire a craving for lusty desires, and make it more and more for what is actually a diminishing pleasure, because the more you engage with it, the less pleasure you get. And that's really what the what lust is, and what the mind makes lust to be. So when we look at the mind, there's that famous phrase, the idle mind is the devil's workshop, which is quite befitting for the devil, speak of the devil. So idle mind, which is empty mind, what happens is that when our mind is empty, there's kind of like nothing positive or nothing powerful for the imagination to attach on. Like, one of the functions of the mind is imagination. So when the mind is empty, the imagination has to go somewhere. And so when it's empty, when it's not given positive things, it will naturally go to what are we used to. And because of our conditioning, not necessarily because of this life, not necessarily because of things we've done in this life, but hundreds and thousands of lifetimes of material conditioning is the habit we're fighting against. We're not fighting against something easy. We're not fighting against something that we picked up yesterday and have to try and put in the bin. It's something that's been with us for thousands and thousands of lifetimes. And so the imagination naturally goes to fantasies and imaginations about lower qualities like lust. And it grabs onto these things, especially when we have an idle mind. So what's really important is that, and I love this solution, Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj talks about this in one of his books, is that we have to constructively engage our mind into higher things so that our imagination clocks onto it. So for example, if you don't have an idle mind and you're thinking like, oh, I'm serving at Harrow Jamming and I really want to make sure that we make a bigger event this time, we do this and we do that. Your imagination and your mind have something positive to attach to, so that they don't really have that desire to go to the lower things. So what's really important, and you basically essentially we have to give the mind and the imagination something to latch onto, which they think will bring you joy. So when there's nothing in your mind, they think that lower desires will bring you joy because it's not being given another option. But when it's being given an option of constructive, positive, Krishna conscious engagement that you find fun, you find amazing and exciting and beautiful, then it will just go to that. It will happily go to that and not worry about the lower stuff. For example, how many of you have fasted on Janmashtami during being in a PS play or PS10? I think a lot of you would have that experience. So when you're having so much fun in the PS10, so much fun in the play with your friends, in the association, doing service, you're not so worried about eating. So in this case, it's the same principle. If we can it's really important and really crucial that each one of us find a service, pray for some engagement that we can get so absorbed in that our imagination and mind don't have to kind of remember the other stuff. Okay, so that's the principle of the mind. Okay, some nice questions. So how do we practically re-educate our emotions? So that's a really good point. I'm going to pick up that question in the next slide. And if it's not answered, please do ask it again. When we see others acting lustfully, our own lusty desires are evoked, e.g. ajamil. Then how do we deal with this when we are bombarded on social media by this? Amazing question. Again, hopefully I'll pick this up in the next one. If it's not answered, tell me. And then a couple of questions that are about relationships. So I'm going to take them at the end if that's okay. Okay, so we've done physical. Physical is about avoiding triggers, about redirecting our energy. We've done emotional. Emotional is about understanding where we land in the trough, not to succumb to it, but rather re-educate our emotions to be able to deal with it differently. Third is we've done mental. Mental is about keeping constructive engagement for our mind so that we don't get dragged down by the mind. And now we're going to the intellectual platform. So Screwtape Letter says, it is the same with other desires of the flesh. You are much more likely to make your man a sound drunkard by pressing drink on him as an anodyne when he is dull and weary than by encouraging him to use it as a means of merriment amongst his friends when he is happy or expansive. So kind of pulling back onto the emotional point is that when we're feeling down, when our powers of resistance are low, that is probably when we'll get the hardest test. We may be getting tested all the time. We may not be noticing it, but our strength will be lower. So we need to kind of be aware of that. And how we be aware of it, how we re-educate our emotions is through our intelligence. So Jiva Goswami gives a very, very practical and beautiful understanding of Krishna consciousness at a junior stage. He says that Krishna consciousness at a junior stage, you maintain your spiritual life, your Krishna consciousness by your intelligence, not necessarily by your love for Krishna. Because at stages that a lot of us may be at, a lot of us where we're at, is that we haven't got that genuine, spontaneous love for Krishna, but we have intelligence. We have a sense of Krishna consciousness is better than material life. So my intelligence is telling me this is higher than that. So let me kind of focus on that. And that's exactly the point we're making here, is that how to strengthen your intelligence so that when it comes to a trough, when it comes to your imagination taking you away, when it even comes to you being in front of a trigger, is it possible for your intelligence to save you? And the truth is that we should avoid all of those things. We should understand all of those things, but sometimes they're unavoidable. And then we have our intelligence. Our intelligence can support us and help us. Basically, what we need to make is our intelligence should be so strong and so fast that it should be quicker than the mind. So as soon as the mind starts veering off, the intelligence comes and stops it away, takes it away and takes it towards what we actually want. So so in terms of the question about how do we re-educate our emotions, is that we need to uplift our intelligence, because I'll give you an example. See, whatever the situation is, whether the trigger is a physical trigger, it's an emotional trigger, or it's a mental trigger, what will happen is once we're triggered, we'll then start thinking of lusty desires. Very standard. You see something, you think lusty desire. Then what needs to happen is that the intelligence needs to kick in. And now the mind has two options. The mind has the intelligent choice or the lusty choice. If the intelligence is strong enough, the intelligence will be able to convince your mind that, yes, this is higher than the lusty choice. Okay, let me latch onto it. When our intelligence is weak, it won't stand any chance in front of the lusty choice and will naturally go to the lusty choice. And it's just very simple logic, actually, essentially. So the point is, if we can strengthen our intelligence to really kind of be our guard, like in the example of the castle we gave last week, be our guard, then it can help us latch onto the right thing, even when we're in the face of temptations. So the two ways that Chaitanya Champu in this podcast that I heard, he said to develop your intelligence in this regard is, one, find your conviction. So that's kind of the point of these kind of talks. But also the real thing is that we have to go deep. We have to go inwards. We have to go and reflect, kind of like how Krishna Kirtan is talking about reflection and journal writing. We have to go and reflect, why is it that I want to abstain? Or why is it that I don't want to engage in lusty desires? If we can't answer that for ourselves, it's going to be difficult. For example, someone who really wants to become a footballer, as soon as the going gets tough, if he hasn't got a real understanding of why do I want to do this, what is driving me to do this, they'll easily stop. In the same way, for us as a spiritual seeker, we want to get over lusty desires, and it's possible. So we want to get it over, and we know it's eventually possible. So we have to have that conviction of what it is. So we have to go into scriptures, we have to find those quotes, find those verses, find those classes from your favorite speaker, find whatever it is that we can hold sacred in our heart as treasures and jewels, and we can look back to them, we can look at them in times of struggle. In times of struggle, we remember a verse. In times of hardships, we remember a talk that someone gave. We heard this class on ISKCON Desire Tree, or whatever it is. Find those jewels, find your conviction, and then with strong conviction, that will help you stop accessing those lusty desires. And the second way is finding devotional habits, because conviction alone is not enough. Conviction is like theoretical. So like in the scenario of here, you've got your desire, you've got your mind, you've got the lusty desire, and you've got the intelligent conviction. So the intelligence is saying, yeah, don't do it. Okay, fine. If I listen to my intelligence, I won't do it. But now what do I do? The mind has to do something. The body has to do something. So developing devotional habits is like the second step. So once we've got our conviction, then our conviction should lead us to our devotional habits. That may be, we have like a default thing we go to when we're struggling with something, or we go and listen to a class by this person, or we chant some rounds, we go for a walk, we write in our journal. Finding some devotional habits, like journal writing, So we find some devotional habits, and we keep ourselves our intelligence spiritually engaged. And not only at times of difficulties, but throughout the day. We have our morning routine. We have our morning sadhana, like Sutapa gave this Casey talk yesterday, or Sutapa gave this, I think it was yesterday. And someone asked him, I think Abhishek might have asked him, what's the most important thing well, there was some question, and he basically said that the most important thing that students need is a spiritual practice. And he didn't stop there. He had a spiritual practice in the morning. The morning hours are so powerful, kind of how we talk about waking up early type talk. The morning hours are so powerful. Developing a solid spiritual devotional habit of waking up early, having our morning practices will give us so much strength and power to kind of not be affected by so many things. So that's how we deal with this problem from an intellectual point of view, from an intelligence point of view. And then, okay, so this is a nice question. So how do we change our mindset? How do we change the mindset of, I'll do it when I'm older? Okay, so very nice question. So sometimes we may think, oh, I've got this bad habit, but what's the point? I'm young, it's fine. I'll sort it out in a couple of years or 5 years, 10 years. So one thing is that from a psychological point of view, every time we engage in a habit, we kind of make like a deeper groove in our brain. So imagine you've got like a jug of water going down a flat surface. When it goes down a flat surface, it will spread everywhere. But when there's a groove or like a ditch, it will go straight through that thing. And as we engage in habits, that gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and therefore becomes harder and harder to get rid of. So the quicker we can catch bad habits, the better. If we catch them too late, it's still, obviously, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that you see Ajama's example, he chanted Vishnu's name, and there is that chance, but that's very unlikely. Catching the habits earlier is much, much more intelligent way to do it. And it will provide a better, it'll lead you to your goals faster. Because the point is like, sometimes we think like, oh, only like pure devotees are only like old, or like after like 20 years in the movement, someone's become a pure devotee, or, there's only serious devotees, but those serious devotees have been in the movement for years and years and years. And maybe once I've been in there for years and years, I'll be like a serious devotee. Whereas the truth is that we can access the highest spiritual bliss, the highest like aspects of devotional service at any age. There's no age barrier. There's not that I have to be in the movement for 20 years. Like Prahlad Maharaj, Dhruva Maharaj, these are all examples of young children that have become, who are pure devotees. So going for pure devotional service, going for this goal of bhakti, going for kind of things that stop our bad habits and improve our good habits, improve our connection to Krishna, even at a young age, is so powerful and it's so required. The younger it is, the better. The earlier we start, the better. There's no need to wait for things when we're older. And the other thing is that at this age, at the student phase of life or young married phase of life, we actually have a lot more time than we're going to have in the future. And this time is such a powerful commodity. Like if we use this time wisely, we'll be benefiting off it for the rest of our life. If we waste this time, then we'll always be chronically out of time in the future and struggling to get what we thought, oh, we'll do later. So that's why it's quite important to start early. Okay, so the next one. So we've talked about physical, emotional, mental intelligence, and now from a spiritual point of view, we're going to go. And this I quite like because, again, the devil's talking about how to test them. And he's saying, basically what he's saying is that, see, after hearing something like this, or after hearing a class on something that we are struggling with, or a habit we were trying to develop, we'll make a resolution. We'll be like, tomorrow I'm going to do this. Tomorrow I'm going to do that. And we'll think that, oh, if I've done it for a week, I'm like, oh, that's quite successful. I'm doing quite well. It's doing really well. And then what will happen is that, he says, in attacks on patience, chastity, and fortitude, the fun is to make the man yield, i.e. give up, just when, had he but known it, relief was almost in sight. So like Maya will maybe let us go for 5 days, go for 7 days, go for 12 days about things that, go for 5-7 days about us working on our good habit, and then really push us hard, because we didn't know it, but that actually maybe we were close to defeating that obstacle, and then she presses really hard. And that's what the devil was saying. And so from a spiritual point of view, there's these three aspects, and I'll run through them quickly. Three aspects of shifting our, three aspects of like overcoming these lusty desires. The first is we have to experience a higher taste. So we have to do things, we have to connect with Krishna in such a way that we can get glimpses of the higher taste. The more we engage in kirtan, the more we engage with surface, we get more experience of the higher taste, because like you were saying, if the intelligence has a reminder of, gives you the reminder of higher taste in the face of temptation, you have more chance of not succumbing to the temptation. What that higher taste will then do is then change the quality of our desires. See, right now our desires are based on thousands and thousands and thousands of lifetimes of conditioning. So in one sense there is, but in one sense, to no fault of our own, we will struggle because our desires are towards the negative. But by experiencing higher taste, slowly, our desires will change, and that will solve the problem from the root. Because if you don't even desire lusty things, how can one engage in it? Why would one engage in it? So that is at the deepest level about how Krishna consciousness will actually help us overcome our lusty desires. Just like if water is flowing down a stream, for it to change, if you want to change its path, you have to put breakers or blocks or different things in the way to make it move. In the same way, our desires are flowing. Our material desires, which are very, very almost, obviously not in reality, but almost native or natural to us because of so much conditioning, are flowing in a certain way. So we have to put these spiritual breakers in so we can move in a different direction, and our desires can change, we can change the quality of our desires. So this is like a summary slide. So we talked about how the mind, so Maya is like an Instagram filter that makes everything look really attractive, but it's not really the case. Then we talked about physical, emotional, mental, intellectual, spiritual. Physical, kind of about avoiding triggers. Emotional, re-educating our emotions. Mental, constructive engagement for the mind. Intellectual, finding our conviction and devotional habits. And spiritual, connecting with a higher taste. And these are kind of like, basically it's trying to give you an understanding of how we can fight these desires. So I will maybe do some more questions now. Actually, let me finish this bit. So this is a nice part. So this part is talking about the devil has tried to push his patient into lust. He's tried and he's tried and he's tried, and finally he's failed. And the idea of this quote is that it gives us hope. He says, "I note with great displeasure that the enemy has for the time being put a forcible end to your direct attacks on the patient's chastity," the enemy being Krishna. So Krishna has helped the devotee in this case come over these attacks. "You ought to have known that he always does this in the end." So Krishna always helps in the end. "And you ought to have stopped before you reach that stage. For as things are now, your man has now discovered the dangerous truth." A very simple illusion that we may not realize, that these attacks don't last forever. Consequently, you cannot use this again. And what is after all our best weapon, the belief of ignorant humans that there is no hope of getting rid of us but by yielding. So, you know, when a desire, when such a strong temptation comes, it comes into our heart so strongly that we feel like the only way I'm going to get over this desire is by acting on it, is by engaging on it. But the point they're making is that is the belief of ignorant humans. And that belief is what the devil preys on, what Kali's agents, what Maya preys on, is that we'll get attacked and then we'll think the only way to rid this is to engage in it. But actually what this is saying is that that's not the case. And one nice example that I like to remember is that lusty desires, or any desires of the body, hunger, tiredness, thirst, whatever, they all come like waves. At the top of a wave, it looks really big and really strong. But then what happens to the top of the wave? After about 30 seconds, it goes down. So in the same way, this happens with our desires. A lusty desire, a hunger, or tiredness may come. It may come really strongly, 1 hour, half an hour, 2 hours, whatever. But eventually it will pass away. And if we can just ride the wave rather than being stuck at the bottom and being carried by the wave, we can easily, not easily, but we can more so overcome these desires. So, and so in preparation for this class, I heard this short video clip, and I'll send it after. Someone asked Radha Maharaj, it was like a youth boys program, and it looked really like a really cool program. And they said, "I find it very difficult to overcome. Temptations are so strong. If a person is falling down, how can he overcome it? His past conditioning are very strong, but he does have a desire to get rid of it. Please instruct me." So this boy, he was a student, and he's saying that I want to overcome these desires, but my senses are so strong, temptations are so strong, what can I do? And so Maharaj's first few words for me were like kind of the summary for this whole bit. He said it requires sincerity. Sincerity is something we touched on last time. And so he explained that our sincerity is expressed by our determination to be resolute in our purpose. So to break down, make sincerity practical. Sincerity, like in different places, different people explain that sincerity means to try and do the right thing always. And that's what it is really, is that we can only really try, like an attack comes or we're seeing a trigger, we can try and do our best. Every situation, to be sincere means to be determined to try and do our best. And he says, your sincerity will be how you focus, your sincerity will be on how you focus to find what transformation is required in your life, in our life, to serve Krishna and to please Krishna. See, everyone will have a different thing. Someone will have temptations by Netflix. Someone will have temptations by people at school. Someone will have temptations by different, there's so many different things. Our sincerity to the process of bhakti, to the process of Krishna is, okay, let me have a look at what transformation do I need to make in my life, and let me make that, and let me work on that. Even if I can't make it today, let me work on it. Let me desire to work on it in order to please and serve Krishna. So yeah, that is the conclusion. Please, so feel free to keep sending questions. We're going a little bit over time, but I will answer the questions that are in the chat right now. And if you have more, just send them and we can see. Okay, so these questions are around those in relationships. So one is, how can you ready yourself whilst in a relationship? So for example, one may feel that one's in a relationship, but one wants to become more ready for that relationship, one wants to become more strong and emotionally strong and have spiritual strength. So it's a really nice point. And so just thinking about it here now, one is that we see like lots of devotees who come to Krishna consciousness after they're in a relationship and then go on to become amazing devotees. So there's no, if one finds oneself in that situation, there's no lack of hope. The real thing about how to get ready and how to spiritually develop, the key thing is, one is to really focus on our sadhana and our reading. That, like our chanting and our reading, is what will make us spiritually strong. That morning routine, like, see, for example, different people latch onto different things. For example, I know when I don't read Bhagavatam or read KC books for like a couple of days, my mind starts going really strange and really like goes on another tangent. And so I know I need that. I need regular reading to be able to give me that strength. Like there's this beautiful verse in the Bhagavatam, Nashta Prayasha Bhadrashu, and it talks about how one should recite the Bhagavatam or read the Bhagavatam, hear the Bhagavatam every single day. And this daily recital of the Bhagavatam will irrevocably establish Krishna in the heart. So once Krishna is established in the heart, we're set. You know, like the point is, engaging with the process very sincerely every day is what will give us that readiness and that spiritual strength to be able to handle these situations. And in terms of readiness in a particular sense of not necessarily spiritual strength, but just in a relationship point of view, I think there's always time to ready oneself and go deeper into our understanding of how to have a good relationship. I really feel like, so one of the questions relates to this, is that, do you have a list of Grihastha Ashram books, lectures, podcast notes that you would recommend? So there are some books that I would definitely recommend. And the point is that even if we are in a relationship, we can, and we haven't, for example, done this study or done this knowledge, we can do it now and we can keep developing it. And even while we're in a relationship, we should still be doing it. Like, I feel like, just like, for example, you've got an exam coming up, you keep studying. You don't just like study for 1 minute at the start of July and then stop studying till your exam. It's an ongoing process. Even with relationships or any big endeavor or parenting or anything like that, it's like that. It's constantly increasing our knowledge and learning more, practicing different things and things like that. And so in terms of books and lectures and things, obviously there's so many, there's some like I just typed in, typically when I kind of do this thing, I type into YouTube, like the topic and then ISKCON, and loads of things come up. So like overcoming lust in ISKCON, and you get a bunch of classes. Like marriage and ISKCON, you get a bunch of really nice classes. There's some at least in the title, and I've heard them as well, there's like 2 or 3 really nice classes by Srila Prabhupada on marriage. Then I personally heard some classes from Radhanath Swami. Like he has a ISKCON Desire Tree. They have like a list of like 10, 15 that were really helpful for me. Again, there'll be so many sannyasis and so many grahastas that give fantastic classes. In terms of books, there is the GVT book. I thought that was really nice. And then there's also some Kami books like devotees recommend. So if anyone wants, they can text me and I can send them a list of things that I heard. This is obviously not an exhaustive list. It's just kind of things that resonated with me. Everyone will have different things that resonate with them. And I think even more, so one aspect is the reading, the studying, the hearing, but another really powerful aspect is having these discussions with senior grahastas that you trust, grahastas that are honest with you, because they will give you life, like real practical understanding, practical experiences, and especially if they're honest. If they're honest, then they can genuinely help our understanding of these things. And just to say, I can't tell if the questions are being answered or not. So just tell me in the chat or something if it's not. Okay, next question is, sorry. Sometimes suppressing the desire so much, sometimes after suppressing the desire so much, it affects my chanting after like a month or so. Is that normal? Can something be done about that? So yeah, so suppressing desire is quite, can definitely lead to difficulties and can definitely lead to making things hard. And that's kind of the point of Krishna consciousness. It's not about suppression, it's about re-engagement. See, if we're constantly having to suppress and push down and fight hard and this and that, that's definitely one aspect of sincerity, is to try and push these things out of our mind. But a much more powerful method is what Krishna gives as Yukta Vairagya. Yukta Vairagya means take that energy or take that material thing and engage it in the service of the Lord. So we have this lustful energy. Okay, let's shift it. Let me move from ignorance of this lustful energy. Let me move to passion. Let me do some exercise. Let me do some yoga. Let me do some whatever. And then once I've got that, then let me move to goodness. Now let me uplift my consciousness into chanting, reading, hearing. And it may be that you need to find things that you find really, really inspiring to hear at that stage, and not just things you may find inspiring on every other day. So that's also kind of helpful. But yeah, for sure, suppressing one's desires can lead to a lot of frustration, and that frustration will bring us into the mode of ignorance. And then in the mode of ignorance, it's really hard to have taste for hearing and chanting. So the idea is really, as far as possible, uplift your consciousness, I would say. Okay, so we falsely label, what if we falsely label sincerity to participate in self-gratification? Shyam, can you explain that one a bit more if you don't mind? Is he there?
Yeah, over. No, so the question was like, you kind of finished off going that, you know, at the end of the day, Margie mentioned that sincerity is the main thing. So what if I tell myself, oh, you know, I'm trying to be sincere as possible next time, kind of thing? Or you say, oh, I've been sincere all this time, like it will happen eventually, let me just give in this one time.
This is a really good question. So I think for me, that quote of Screwtape Letter might help with this, is that so okay, one thing is that this problem is really hard, and we shouldn't think that, like, it's very easy to become very, very guilty, very, very depressed, very, very down, but and like kind of not want to engage in Krishna conscious activities. So first thing is to understand that if we do fall down, there is never a reason not to do more service, more chanting, more that. So I'll give you an example. Like, I remember one time I was at work, not at Avanti, but before, it's become obvious from the story, is that we went for a work lunch, and in my meal there was egg, but I didn't know it, and I only found out after when my colleagues were talking about it, and I felt terrible. I felt so disgusted, and I know this is a different thing, but just kind of give an easy example, and I felt so disgusted. So I was messaging Ghanshyam Priya. I was like, oh no, this was like 5-6 years ago, whatever, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I feel so bad. And he said, like, yeah, repentance is one stage. So like how there is repentance required to understand that this wasn't great, and this is the kind of why it's not good. And that repentance will hopefully help us not do it again. But he said the other thing is do something extra positive in your Christian consciousness now. So now go and with great consciousness, cook a meal for the Lord and offer it. So find a counteracting spiritual activity that you can do to kind of, obviously not like relieving yourself of it, because the sinful act has been committed and there's going to be some consequence and whatever. But the principle is to show our sincerity, is that, okay, I did fall down, I did struggle. Now let me show Krishna that I want to have a relationship, I want to serve him, I want to do more, and do more in a positive spiritual sense. And so, Shyam, to your point about what if we say to ourselves, let's do it, I'll do it next time, I'll do it next time. That is a temptation of the mind, and it will happen, and it probably will happen many times. But the idea is to focus on all these other things that we've spoken about, developing our intelligence so strong that you won't want to feel like that next time. You won't come to the stage where it'll be like, oh, let me do it next time. Actually, the intelligence is stronger and you grab onto it and it works. So like, if, for example, if you go into battle and you haven't done any training, you're going to die. You don't know how to pick up a gun. You just walk around, you're just going to get shot. So in the same way, that's kind of what happens to us. We walk around and we get hit by lust and we just get shot. But if we've done our training, if we've done strong morning sadhana, if we've had good association, if we found our conviction, we're wearing like a bulletproof vest. This bulletproof vest will stop us being hurt by the attacks on Maya. So in the process of us developing this vest, we may fall down, we may get bruised, we may get hurt. Okay, you get hurt, let's step back onto the horse and try again, until we can constantly keep working and develop this spiritual strength to be less attacked and less affected. I hope that makes sense. So someone asked on that question, I found that my inspiration diminished the longer I stopped myself from acting on the desire. So I think, see, anything born out of the mode of ignorance will lead to fizzling out. So my sense is there's a few things. One is that if our engagement with the desire, even our engagement with stopping the desire, is from a mode of ignorance point of view, sorry, there's a correction. So I found my inspiration to focus on Krishna diminished the longer I stopped from acting on the desire. So I'm guessing what you're saying is that you're trying to stop the desire and you manage to stop it, but slowly the desire is getting stronger and stronger, like a heavy burden, and is weighing down on you, and your connection to Krishna is reducing. And then the desire kind of like takes over your mind. So that I completely understand that, and that makes complete sense. And that's kind of like that trough point. So like at the start of your like desire to start a new habit, what happens is you have great willpower, you have excitement, you have strength. And as time goes on, that strength diminishes and diminishes and diminishes. Willpower will fail you. Willpower will diminish and diminish and diminish. So like I'll give you an interesting example. Like maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, one of my friends got initiated, and he kind of, after his initiation, maybe like a month or so after, he said, "Do you think I got initiated too young? Like, I feel like the buzz and the hype from initiation is gone." And what we were saying to him is that, see, the buzz and the hype of initiation is important and it will give you a lift, but it will slowly go down. In order to maintain a high level of Krishna consciousness, eventually we have to replace hype of initiation or hype of japa or anything with genuine depth. So as this is going down, our depth should be going up, and therefore replacing the need for hype with genuine spiritual connection. So in the same way is that when we start a hard habit, it will go down and down and down. Our willpower will go down and down. We have to replace that lack of willpower with something. So the more and more we engage with Krishna in spiritual activities, our spiritual depth will increase and uplift us even when our willpower is not strong enough. So it may not be the first time, it may be not the second time, maybe like 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, we go up and down. But if we're moving, the idea is to constantly, slowly move in this direction upwards. So even though we're going up and down, our ups and downs are getting higher and higher. Whereas otherwise, we're constantly moving this way if we're not doing anything consciously. So to go up and down is not necessarily the issue. The issue is to keep the trajectory moving upwards. And that happens through deeper and deeper connection with Krishna conscious activities every day, every time we engage with them, push ourselves a little bit more, go a bit deeper. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So that is all the questions on the chat. If anyone would like to ask anything now, feel free. Otherwise, yeah, I hope that was helpful in some way. And thank you. And I want to make it clear that this class is more for me than any of you. And doing kind of the hearing around it was really helpful for me. Really, I learned a lot, and I kind of felt like some more convictions and different things like that. And I want to send you all the bits and bobs or different resources that went into making this class, and nice, like some books and some extracts and some talks and YouTube channel. So you can also go and start. This could be, if for example, this is something you struggle with and you want to start developing your conviction, that could be a good starting point, and then build up your thing. Like I know one devotee who, and I thought this is just so, it's just an act of sincerity, is that when he was younger, he was in the ashram and he was kind of, or before the ashram, he made a document for himself on each of the 6 anarthas. And he said, this is how I connect with the anartha. This is how it attacks me. This is the conviction I get from Bhagavatam. This is the connection I get from my quotes from my spiritual master on the anartha. And he kind of poured his sincerity out into this document. And that was a way of him developing his conviction. So that's like one example. Another example is learning verses that counteract these things. So there's so many different things, and everyone should just kind of find their own way and discuss it with their mentors and discuss it in open, honest conversations about how to really develop our conviction more so we can get the higher taste and slowly be freed from these kind of desires. So thank you so much. And Hare Krishna, I think that's it. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. All glories to Pandav Sana. Hare Bol. Thank you.